Hello and welcome to today's webinar on conversation design, the art and science of teaching robots to talk. Before we dive in, just wanted to start off with a quick poll just to see where you guys are at. So quick question for you, what's your experience with designing for conversations? Pick one of these. I didn't even know conversation design existed, but I'm here to learn. Or perhaps you're not a conversation designer, but you do know about it, or you work with conversation designers. Perhaps you've got some experience here and you've designed a handful of conversational interfaces, or you've designed dozens of them and you can do it in your sleep. So we'd love to get a feel for whereabouts you are in your experience level with conversation design. Nothing at all, awareness and you're working with other people, you've done a bit yourself, or you're a total expert on this. So I can see the votes coming in, so I'll give it a minute or so for everyone to join and to participate in the poll. Just pick one of these options on the screen in front of you now. Just a few attendees to participate. So if you haven't already, there's a poll on the screen right now. What's your experience level with designing for conversation? Okay, I think we've got a good set of answers there. So let's send the poll. I'm going to share the results. So a bit of a spread here. No one really claiming to have enough experience to do it in their sleep. So that's fair enough. It's a tough thing, conversation design. So to do it in your sleep would be quite an amazing feat. But we've got a fairly even split then between those who are here to learn about conversation design for the first time, people working with conversation designers, and people who've got some experience. So I think that's a great setup for today. I'm going to do just a little bit of setting the scene at the beginning, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Sarah Reitsma, who's going to take you on a deep dive into conversation design. So let me just stop sharing that and let's dive in. Firstly, I just wanted to give a bit of an overview in terms of the way at Waterfield we look at customer service and customer experience optimization. You know, the way we like to conceive of it is that we've got human agents and we've got IVR and chatbots, we refer to them as bots, at the front line of delivering great customer service. And behind them, we've got a platform, usually platforms that are helping those humans and help those bots be the best they can be. And around this core conceptualization of customer service, we've got the different practice areas where we support clients and where people need to be focused. The first is customer service strategies. That's asking the questions of, you know, what do humans do? What should my bots be doing? What channels should they be doing it on? And then we've got workforce optimization, human workforce optimization. And this is the tools and techniques and the technology to really empower humans, human agents to be the best they can be and really focus on delivering a great experience to the customer rather than kind of navigating all the tools and the processes and things like that. And then we've got conversational AI, which I sometimes like to refer to as bot workforce optimization. And this is the tools, the techniques, the technology, and the things that we've talking in this webinar series, the bot strategy, the bot conversation design, the bot analytics, that really brings to life our bots and helps them be the best they can be and deliver an amazing experience. Something we're seeing more of is an overlap between conversational AI and agents. So where we can kind of having the conversational AI listening over the shoulder of the agent to the call or to the chat they're engaged on and providing helpful support. So potentially template responses or knowledge-based articles. So almost having like a supervisor looking over your shoulder, give you prompts and give you support in real time. But we're not going to focus on that today. Today, we're going to focus on core of conversational AI and how we can make the bots the best they can be. And the secret here is bot management. And this is what this whole webinar series has been about. And the key thing about bot management is it's a cycle. It starts with data at the bottom there with bot analytics. That was the first webinar in this series. Gathering the data, gathering information, processing it in the right way, thinking about it in the right way to really understand how your bot's performing, what impact they're giving, and what opportunities there might be for improvement. And that data feeds into strategy, to that discovery process that we went through in the second webinar with Dan Aslett from my team, and the 8 steps to building a brilliant bot strategy. And that sets out the vision. It sets out what could our bots do, what should they do, what's it worth, what's the business case, and what's the plan to deliver it. And now we've got those business guardrails on. We've got the clear target in terms of the vision and the outcomes that we're expecting from the bots that we build. Now we've got the guardrails for conversation design. And that's going to be the focus of today's webinar. So I'm delighted to introduce to you Sarah Reitsma. Sarah is Director of Conversation Design and User Experience at Waterfield Technologies as part of the Conversation AI practice. And today she's going to share her wisdom and her experience in terms of conversation design. What it is, what's unique about conversation, how we can design from abundance, and how we can test and learn from the environment around us and from the people that will interact with our systems. So Sarah, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Kerry. I've been developing and designing for voice and conversation for over 20 years now, and I'm really excited today to share just a bit of that knowledge that I've gained in that time around how to design for conversation. Now, there are lots of things that are designed if you think about it. We have physical and mechanical products that we interact with every day that have gone through a rigorous design process. Things like our car, appliances, even the roads and infrastructure in our towns and cities that we live in. These are things that you can touch, you can feel, you can use. And then we have visual and graphical interfaces like the software that we use in our computer, websites, social media, mobile apps. And these are things that we can explore and learn. And finally, we have conversation, which is what you guys are here to learn about today. But designing for conversation is so different than designing for the other two. And so before we get into the process we use to design conversational apps, it's important to understand that how conversational AI is different from your typical digital project or program. Well, graphical interfaces, like for web and mobile, are learned behavior. We learn to interact and adapt to them. We learn to use things now, honestly, from a very early age, like the mouse, the keyboard, an iPad touch screen. And on the other hand, conversation and language is an instinct. It's learned from other humans at a very early age. And what's so unique about it is once we learn it, we can't unlearn it. So let me show you a little bit. Web and mobile can use things like physical metaphors, file folders, filing cabinets, desktops, etc. And we learn and adapt to using them, but language is very different. Language is an instinct. Harvard professor Steven Pinker said, humans can no more suppress their ability to learn and use language than they can suppress the instinct to pull your hand back from a hot surface. Let me give you an example. Let's look at these numbers. So think about these numbers and the way that you understand them. I'm going to say them in 3 different ways. 1, 7, 9, 2, 5, 0. So that sounded probably like a really bad, choppy IVR system. Not unlike many that you've probably actually heard. And if you weren't seeing the numbers on the screen as I said them just now, it would be really hard for you to understand what I was saying and even harder for you to remember it. So let's look at the second grouping, 17, 9, 250. Now that's a little bit easier, but the grouping is still sort of a bit odd. And finally, let's look at the last grouping, 179, 250. So that's much easier in the way that I group them together in even bits of 3s and spoke them with a slight pause in between. You can probably understand that very easily, and you can also probably remember it. Now, another key difference between graphical user interfaces for web and mobile and IVR is that we compare web and mobile with physical objects, while we compare IVR voice and chatbots to humans. We use things like signposts, forms, and catalogs, and we can use these structures to easily find our way around. But conversational interfaces are compared to humans. So our bots need to model human intelligence and conversational norms. And here's the thing, they don't just need to understand, they need to go beyond to be smart, helpful, and resourceful. And I don't know about you, but that's a really high bar when we're comparing our conversational interfaces to humans. So we have to be smart in where we use the technology, and we have to be smart in where we design and how we design for it. If you think about it, even the smart speakers in your corner, you interact more with them like you would with a spouse or a child by telling them things like, Alexa, turn the music down. We have to design and create our bot experiences around the human instinct for language. One very unique piece to these interfaces is that they have to deal with things that our graphical user interfaces don't have to deal with, things like background noise and crosstalk, things that are very unique to that channel. It just doesn't happen, like I said, in graphical user interfaces. I mean, rarely does someone bump your elbow and cause you to type something different or click on the wrong thing. But that happens all the time when we're talking on the phone or yelling across the room to our Alexa device. Every single time I answer the phone or start to yell at Alexa across the room, my children have suddenly the most innate urge to also talk, and inevitably Alexa ends up hearing them instead of me, or the phone call that I'm on picks up their angelic voices and takes me down an errant path. And I'm sure you've likely had something similar happen to you. In conversation design, that means that error correction is so much more important. A GUI interface can't handle a hands-free request if you're driving or your hands are in raw chicken as you're cooking, but you can easily ask Alexa to start your timer, give you the safe temperature for your chicken, or to dictate a text message letting your family know that you'll be home in 10 minutes. So chatbots, assistants, IVR voice, we're now interacting with them where we used to interact with humans. So like I said, that bar is so much higher than for graphical interfaces. People are expecting a human capability, and bots need to interact and speak like humans. And like I said, they need to be smart, helpful, and resourceful like humans are. And so we need to pick very narrow situations where we use them, where they can be as smart, helpful, and resourceful as possible. Next, I'm going to go into the conversation design process that we use. Now that you understand how conversation design is a little bit different, or quite a bit different than designing for physical, mechanical, or graphical user interfaces. So this is the process that we follow for designing a conversational system. And as you can see, we don't hop straight to the detailed design. You'll see that on the right-hand side. That's what a lot of people do. But first, we go carefully through context gathering, high-level design, and prototyping and research. So let's talk through each of those pieces today. First of all, requirements and context gathering. In the early part of design, it's common to use a blend of research methods to inform the design process. Context gathering really works to understand an existing customer experience and often to establish a baseline. Let's look a little bit deeper into this. As we start context gathering, there are two things that we look for. First, attitudinal insights, and secondly, behavioral characteristics. So when we're looking for attitudinal insights, we're looking for things like whether a person is likely to contact you frequently or infrequently, what channels they use. Are they looking to contact you for things that they've already done or things that they're about to do? What channel would they most likely choose in the future? And what channels do they prefer for specific tasks? And when you put all of these together, it helps you get an early indicator if conversation is the right fit and maybe where it would work the best for you. Typically, With modern technology, we can get results for something like this in less than a day using modern survey methods. Now, we also use it to ask how they would respond to certain situations and to give insight into what we might design. So we give users scenarios that they can respond to. We are looking for how they ask for things, what things will they ask for, and this is super helpful in figuring out how complex your design needs to be. But we can't just listen to users. The problem with attitudinal insight is that people don't always know what they want. Customers can easily describe a problem they're having, but not the best solution. So we have to marry concept testing with observation. There are two quotes that I love that fit this so well. And the first one is from Henry Ford, and it says, "If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses." And the second one is from Steve Jobs. "A lot of times people don't know what they want until you show them." So what do we do about this? Well, like I said, we watch them. So we need to collect as many real interactions as possible. Typically, here is the process that we use. We first like to collect around 500 interactions. And this could be call recordings of a caller speaking with either a bot or an agent, or monitoring live calls can work too. If there's audio, then we need to transcribe the phrases in the audio that we heard to describe things. And if it's a chat bot, if they're interacting with or they're typing something into a survey window, then that's already going to be done. The next thing that we do is we categorize that information into intents, basically what the user wants, and entities, which are data to support what the user wants. So for example, if someone says, "I want to make a payment," or "I want to pay a bill," that's going to be an intent of make payment. They may say it in a different way, but in the end, what they're really looking to do is to make a payment. If somebody says, "I want to make a payment for $500, you have the intent make payment, but you also now have an entity, which is the amount of the payment, $500, to add to that. So once we've categorized what people are saying into intents and entities, then finally we are going to sort and prioritize by volume and importance to figure out maybe what should be automated, what should be done first. Maybe you're working with an MVP and you see that a lot of people are asking for a very particular thing. That's something that you would want to bring forward as one of the first things that you do. So after we did this activity for a particular client, we did some card sorting, and we quickly understood that in this scenario, that deductible was the main umbrella topic that we were looking at. And we found lots of nuances under here, and these are the things that you want to look for. People are asking about deductibles, but they're asking it in different ways. For example, a user is going to expect a slightly different answer from a bot if they ask things like, "How much is left?" versus "Have I met the deductible?" One is going to be how much, they're going to want a number, and the other one is more of a yes or no question. This also helps you, doing an exercise like this also helps you get an idea of the frequency of requests. It helps you find the right types of intents and follow up. Now, historically, we've done things like this with utterance capture applications, where you needed to collect 10,000 or 20,000 utterances to get something statistically significant. Or we would have to wait for things like sentiment analysis research. And those techniques took a really long time to run, and those projects were really long, and they don't necessarily give you 100% of the data you're looking for anyways. So we've found that surveys work great. And like I mentioned earlier, the collection of a few hundred utterances as you get started. So key takeaways from requirements and context gathering: you need a balanced approach. You need to test user attitudes to design concepts and then back it up with direct observation. Now, next, we're going to look at high-level design, where we use that behavioral and attitudinal data to create the experience. And at this point, because a lot of designers are ready to jump into detailed design, I want you to think dialogue and information structure rather than call flow, design details, and lines of code. The first thing I want to talk about here is, how do you come up with a great experience? If you are designing from scratch and you know that you need to design something around making payments or deductibles, what do you do to come up with a great experience? Well, you need to get into the habit of capturing inspirational moments as they happen. So Bob Dylan has a great quote here: when inspiration is hard to come by, you have to take it where you find it. And when you get into designing, that means that you have all these great ideas, so you never really have to design from scratch. I mean, let's think about it for a moment. No more blank pages, no more writer's block, no more formulaic prompting. If you have ideas that you can start from and you're not starting from that blank page, it allows you to design from a place of abundance rather than fatigue and overwhelm. So how exactly do we do this? Well, because you don't know when these moments are going to take place, you really need to come up with a system for capturing them, a place where you can store the ideas, but also a go-to place for when you start design. I mean, one of the reasons great conversation designers can come up with great ideas is because they've amassed years of experience. They have lots of stuff to pull from. Dave Perel is an online writer and educator, and he has similar advice. He tells you to capture things you read from online writing, and I think you need a similar approach to conversation design. Like David, I favor digital systems so we can connect and learn from it and have it accessible right at our fingertips. And there are tons of tools out there, and I'm not going to tell you which one to use today. We use a tool called Notion for this. And if you're a team of one, it's going to be free. But if you're a larger organization, it's actually quite affordable. But the tool, like I said, isn't important. Pick one of these. There's a whole bunch of here up on the screen. Check them out, see what works best for you. What's really important is that you have a system to capture things. And so my system is based on three things. First of all, capture everything. So every time I interact with a great chatbot or voice system, I capture it. And every time I interact with some functionality that I think is cool and interesting, I capture it. And essentially what you're doing is you're creating a habit of creating a note, a screenshot, a recording when something catches your interest. And if you work in this way, you tend to go about your day looking for those inspirational moments. And before you know it, you're actually reaping the rewards from doing the capturing. But capturing things alone isn't going to get you very far, because what you're going to end up with is a bunch of disjointed experiences. So you need to tag them. And that helps you index and search later on everything that you've collected along the way. You've essentially created your own personal design database. And it's it's filled with things that you've either personally created or it's because you've collected it. And finally, you got to reuse it. And let's face it, that basically is steal it if you think about it. I mean, I think designers can sometimes really snub the idea of taking inspiration from the outside world, but every industry does it. If you look at music, we've got Bowie, who says the only art I'll ever study is the stuff I can steal from. You've got films where Quentin Tarantino says, I steal from every movie ever made. And he's renowned for having little nods to other films within his own. And you've got Stephen King, who says, when all else fails, give up and go to the library. Even in tech, we see this. You've got Steve Jobs, and I think this is the best one. It comes down to trying to expose yourself to the best things that humans have done, and then try to bring those things into what you're doing. The common theme here is that these people are all considered as creators and highly successful in their field. But you also have something quite interesting. They've separated creativity from originality. And they found ways to combine their ideas with those of other people to keep them creative. So once you have your digital notes, they'll be there forever. Maybe you won't use it today or tomorrow, but maybe you'll use something that you've captured today, 2 years in the future, with a different client in a different way, in a different industry. And you'll also find as you build up your library that you're going to get this compounding benefit as you gather the data. So every time you go to search for something, you're not only going to find one thing, but you're going to find a bunch of ideas. And this is going to help you just start to look at things from a wider perspective. I promise you, if you nail this, you can focus on building something that's great, and it's going to save you time, effort, and build your confidence as well. So next, as you work through high-level design, you really want to think and write from a conversational perspective. So let's talk a little bit about what this means. Don't just write words. Don't just write prompts. Write conversations. Really write from the perspective of conversation. From a very early age, we're taught to read and how to write. And so naturally, we tend to write for things to be read. But conversation design is different than that sort of writing, which is called careful writing. And let's look at some of the differences. So first up, the level of intimacy is completely different. If you think about it, an author has no control over who is reading their work. We access this type of writing via distribution channels, making it even more impersonal. The reader is always one step removed from the author, but with conversation, it's far more personal. It takes place either face-to-face or on personal devices like a cell phone with texting, and all the people involved have given their permission to be in the conversation, and it's happening one-on-one or in small groups. So you've got careful writing that's very impersonal and conversational writing that's much more personal. And then we've got communicating context next. So context can be thought of as the circumstances that surround any situation that will help those involved really understand what's going on. So when we talk, in addition to the words that we use, we also use our bodies and our surroundings and the tone of our voice to help relay what we're going to say. So for example, maybe I want to emphasize a point, so my tone will get very direct and maybe a little louder, just like this. And you might see me gesture something like this. And if I want to ask someone a question, the inflection of my voice will typically go out at the end of the sentence. For example, is that right? And if I want to make a statement, I wouldn't have my voice go up at the end, because that might make the user sound confused, or the person I'm talking to sound confused if they think I'm asking a question, but it's really a statement. So personal story here. Right now in Apple Maps, the words turn right are spoken as a question, at least on my version. So here I am driving along, and instead of turn right, and it's more of a command or a statement, it goes turn right. And the same words, but how you speak them matters. One is more of a command, and one's leaving you wondering, should I really turn right? In this case, your user, and in this case, me, is going to wonder, what should I actually do? So when we write, those nuances and social cues are completely stripped away, and we essentially only have words on the page. But with conversation, we have a lot of those things around it to be able to use. Third, let's talk about lifespan. So careful writing has a very long shelf life. If authors don't know if their work could be read today or in 100 years. And that's not really how we write for conversation. Spoken language is often impromptu. It's transitory. When we talk, our words only ever hang in the air for a few moments. Mistakes happen, especially in spoken interactions. People talk too fast, people stutter, they use the wrong word, they can't find a word, they hesitate. In chat, emojis are often used to express emotion, excitement, and just for fun, and typos are very common. As you can see, conversation is very, very turn-based. And finally, social dynamics. Because writing is so tangible, it's much easier to scrutinize. Writing up until 200 years ago was really only reserved for academia and the social elite. But conversation is the voice of the people. And it's actually our default mode of communication. Reeves and Nash in the media equation studied the social implications of conversation, and they showed that within 2 seconds of hearing a voice, That voice could be a real voice, like my voice, or robotic. We make tons of assumptions about people's intelligence or the bot's intelligence, where they're from. And most importantly, do we like them? Do we trust them? And will we interact and engage with them? So the social dynamic part here is so much more on a personal level with conversation. So just to pull that all together, and I suggest you make a sticky note, put it on your monitor of the differences between careful writing and writing for conversation. It can be very easy to fall into the trap of using those conventional pieces from careful writing. So 2 key things to help you prevent falling into that trap. First of all, build a speak out loud habit. Say things out loud. Role play with someone that is near you, a coworker on your team. Say things out loud, and you'll subconsciously structure your ideas in a way that they leverage the principles of spoken conversational language. You'll start to hear where things sound too formal, too wordy. You won't see that as much if you're just reading it on a page. And secondly, once you've done that, you can use sample dialogues just to capture ideas from the perspective of conversation. If you're not familiar with sample dialogues, they're written in a turn-by-turn format where the user says something and then the bot says something in return, and it's a bit like a movie script. You'll also want to start out your high-level design, not only by putting together sample dialogues, but a conversational flow. And so you'll see an example of one here. It's really a visual map of the conversation. You don't need it to have the exact prompts or the exact words, but you want it laid out in a way to show what your customer is going to experience when they respond in different ways. So finally today, I'm going to talk about prototypes and research. And really what we're trying to do here is explore and explain user reactions to new designs. But how do you test something that doesn't yet exist? And furthermore, how do you get data if it's not built? Well, the answer here is that you build a prototype, just enough of one to immerse your users and get the insight that you need. And for this, we use a concept called Wizard of Oz testing. Wizard of Oz testing, or WOZ testing, is defined by Google's Kathy Pearl, who sums it up perfectly in saying that Wizard of Oz testing, WOZ testing, occurs when the thing being tested does not yet actually exist, and a human is behind the curtain to give the illusion of a fully working system. Now, there are many benefits to testing a prototype of your system before you go into development. First of all, you can simulate realistic functional testing where the user feels that they're using the real system. And this early type of user testing can find 80 to 90% of usability problems before development even starts. It also informs the design. It allows designers the freedom to trial and test ideas in a controlled environment without an impact to real users. Users often have great suggestions to help improve the quality of your product, so listen to them. It also helps us get quick insight, right? So it avoids the need to develop a fully functional application, and it gives quick validation of flawed business requirements or error-prone design paths. It allows a rapid iteration of user experience without having to integrate to backend systems. It's reliable, it's tried and tested. WOZ testing has been used successfully as a way to test prototypes for 20 to 30 years. And it's low cost, it's relatively quick and cost effective. It's a quick and cost effective way to run early usability evaluations. Catching problems during the design process is substantially cheaper than finding issues in production. And the beauty here is that as we're looking to explore and explain behavior, we don't need a lot of test subjects. In fact, we only need about 5 users to find 80% of usability issues. This allows this option to be quite low cost, and the research can be turned around extremely quickly, like I said before. And that allows you as a designer to focus on really understanding the what, the why, and the how users interact with your system. And it helps you to optimize and inform the next iteration of the design before moving forward. Now, there are several prototypes can take several forms. And we've been running over the phone WAS studies since around 2002, SMS studies since 2015, chat since about 2017, and more recently, voice assistant studies as well. And so my advice is to go push the boundaries. You'll be surprised at what you can achieve without even writing a single line of code. So finally, before we end today, I just want to briefly mention how the first part of the process with the requirements, context gathering, high-level design, and prototype and usability fit with the end of the process, which is our detailed design and implementation phases. You really cannot have one without the other. I can't say that with any more emphasis. I know that often we're put in a place of urgent need. You're told, we have to start design today. We need to have this system up in 2 months. But skipping the first part of this process will only lead to more failures and more iterations that will further elongate your project. And so taking some time up front, not even that much extra time, is so worth it for launching a successful system. So key points to remember today, if you don't remember anything else: conversation design is unique because conversation is truly an instinct. Secondly, requirements and context gathering is a must. We have to consider both attitudes and behaviors. And high-level design and strategy should always come before the details. Don't wait for creativity. Constantly be capturing experiences that you personally love. Design for conversation, say it out loud, talk to yourself, talk to other people, make sure that you're actually speaking the words that you're writing. And then finally, use WAS testing for early usability and feedback into design. Fail early, it costs less. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. Back to you, Kerry.
Thank you, Sarah. That was fantastic. I think it's really interesting to see how hopefully you've opened the mind of our attendees today about all these extra things, all these things that we have to do in conversation design, even before we get to the detailed specification and implementation. And it's not just for fun. As part of this webinar series, we've been talking about this whole bot management system, starting with data, going into strategy, which drive design, which then we have new interactions with customers and we get new data. And I think what's been really interesting for me to learn over the last decade or two in this space is how all these things that Sarah's been talking about really, really have an impact on the outcomes. Things like the persona, the way the character talks, that reference that Sarah shared with Reeds and Nass. It sounds like it's just fluffy, it's just how it sounds. But we've seen changes in the way that the voice talent articulates certain prompts, change the containment achieved in an IVR. So this is really going to hit the bottom line, really going to affect the outcomes of the system. Now we've got 6 or 7 minutes for a few questions, and I can see we've had a few come in during the session. The first one I've got here, Sarah, is how do you teach a robot to handle multiple intents?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that's obviously becoming more important as people adapt to smart speakers. I think we're used to asking for multiple things at once, or we're used to asking for something with extra information in it. So a lot of the new AI platforms, IBM Watson, Google, CCAI, things like that, can capture multiple intents fairly easily and also capture the entities around those intents, which is probably even more important. You can actually train those AI engines to know about things like, I want to make a payment, I want to pay my bill, payment, my payment's due today, all sorts of different ways to say, make a payment. You could also make sure that if the person adds anything extra into that you're capturing that as well, right? So I want to make a payment for $500 today, or why I want to pay my amount due today. You've not only learned that the person wants to make a payment, You've learned how much they want to pay, $500 in the first example, or they may even say, just, I want to pay my amount due. If you have that data from the backend system, you can easily pull it and you don't have to prompt them for it. And you've learned when they want to make a payment. They want to make it today. So you're able to essentially skip a bunch of the conversation and lead straight into the details around making the payment, like the credit card number or the bank account. You can also capture multiple intents. So that's more capturing intents and entities. If you want to capture multiple intents, you certainly can do that too. These systems allow for the bot to know about multiple things at once. And it's really in your programming and in your design where you store that information so that you know that maybe the person first wants to make a payment and then they want to request a document. And you could certainly hold that information while they're doing one of the tasks, making a payment. And then when they get done with that, if they've asked to make a payment and request a document, you could lead them directly into that. So again, a lot of the newer tools make this very possible just by setting up the intents and entities appropriately within the tool.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah. I think I'd add, back to this whole idea of bot management and using data to drive strategy, to drive design, to develop more data is, and to what you were mentioning earlier, Sarah, observe behavior. What are people actually doing? And we are seeing behavior change. We are seeing people use more complex language with IVRs and chatbots because they've got a bit more used to doing that with their speaker, like smart devices, like you said, Sarah. But I think there's also a bit of tech push here where the tech vendors are saying, oh yeah, you need our system because it does multiple intents and like just look at your data and see how much it actually happens. If it's happening enough, build for it. But if it's just like a tiny corner case, you'd be much better investing your effort in areas that are going to get more use and more benefits for your customers. So I've got another one here, which is from David. Mentioned something I said at the beginning when I was talking about platform or platforms, and David asked, what are the decisions and the pros and cons of a singular platform versus different platforms? This is both a very, very, very important question, but also a very difficult one to answer. And I've seen people take different angles to this. There's the advantage of having best of breed, where you pick all the best elements and integrate them all together. And systems are more open nowadays, so that makes that possible. But there's others that want to go for best of suite, where it's all sort of integrated together. Look, I think my experience has been that for 80 to 90% of the use cases that you're going to be tackling, all of the platforms can cover it. When you want to do some of the more advanced things that Sarah's been talking about with natural language and multiple intents, multiple entities, there you do get beyond the capabilities of most of the kind of standard IVR chatbot platforms that bundled with your contact center platform. And then you probably want to be using something more advanced like a Google Dialogflow, an IBM Watson, or a Microsoft Azure bot framework. And the great thing is that those platforms are designed to be integrated with other contact center platforms. So I think my advice would be, use what you've got, because you can probably get a lot more out of it than you are now, especially if you use this bot management system we've been talking about. And second, don't feel worried about integrating with one of the newer conversational AI platforms to add that capability you might be missing. And we're nearly up to time now, but we do have one other question that someone had raised, which was, what are the human capital investments that we should be thinking about to achieve the best business gains from virtual assistant software, from moving from an older IVR to a more modern experience? So do you want to take a quick go at that, and then maybe I can round out to finish out today's session? So essentially, I mean, you've covered a lot of it, but what people do we need to get the most out of the platforms that we're deploying?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I would say you need a good conversation designer, a bot strategist. You need people to be able to look at data and analytics because that's really going to feed into how you iterate on your design. You'll need some developers, obviously, and kind of your standard implementation team, right? But I think the biggest thing is that this can be a really specialist skill set. It can be very hard to hire for. There is a limited set of conversation designers out there, and a lot of them are employed by Amazon and Google now, right? Because they are like two huge behemoths that are doing a ton when it comes to conversation design. So I think really focusing on someone that is on the strategy side, a good conversation designer, and someone that can dig into analytics will really get you a very long way to having a successful system.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And I think a really nice way to actually round out this series of 3 webinars, because you mentioned there those 3 stages in the bot management system. Analytics, you need people who can look at data and derive insights from it. You've got strategy, you need people who can look at the strategy of the business, capabilities of the platforms, and data to drive what we're going to build. And then, of course, you need conversation designers, which has been what we've been covering today. And look, I think you make a really good point, Sarah. This is such a hot space at the moment. You know, we're growing fast, we're recruiting all the time, and to find good people with experience in this area is really tough. So if that is something you're challenged with, do reach out. You know, we'd love to help. To support your initiatives, to coach and train you to do more yourselves, and ultimately achieve our mission, which is to make conversational AI a real force for good in today's world. So all of you, thank you for joining. Sarah, thank you so much for the content today. Really interesting. And if you missed the first 2 webinars, then they are available on demand, so you can catch up on the whole series. But for today, that's it. Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. Goodbye.
Thanks, guys.